Okay, imagine the scene. It's Sunday morning, it's 7:30 a.m., and a woman walks into her bedroom, and she's dressed to go out. And as she walks into the bedroom, she sees her husband sitting in a chair, scrolling through his messages on his iPhone. He's still wearing his pajamas. So she says, you're still not ready for church? He said, well, I don't want to go to church today. And he sort of pouts as he says it, kind of like a child not wanting to go to his first day of school in first grade. Well, why not? Why don't you want to go? She says, you've always liked it before. Not always, he says, sometimes I hate it there. Now, don't say that, she said. I mean, what's wrong with our church? And he said, well, for starters, the services are too long. The music is boring. The sermons aren't relevant to real life, and the people aren't very friendly. Well, that may be true, she says, but you still have to go. And, well, why do I have to go, he begs her. Well, because you're the pastor, she says. Now, I'm sure no pastor at this church has ever felt that way on a Sunday morning, but the truth of the matter is what that pastor was wrestling with on that Sunday morning was the very real struggle between have to and get to. His wife was reminding him that he had to go to church, but he didn't want to, and he listed all the reasons why he didn't want to. And I'll tell you, I've felt like that at times in my life, haven't you? I mean, there have been a number of Saturday nights over the course of my 30 years in ministry where I've sat there just staring at a blank computer screen, and the thought that was rushing through my mind was, I have to preach tomorrow. Sometimes it was the topic that I was going to talk about that caused me to think those thoughts. Sometimes it was the fact that I was going to have to preach that caused me to think those thoughts. And I'm going to tell you, those Saturday nights were real battles. Praise God, those nights don't come along very often. And the truth of the matter is they tend to be more of a sign that I'm close to burnout when they arise. Because most of the time, I have a get-to attitude when it comes to preaching. I mean, I love what God has called me and gifted me to do. It energizes me. It drives me. I mean, what's more, I get to share the most incredible thing. Because every Sunday, I have the opportunity to preach a message that has the potential to change a person's heart and change their eternal destination. I mean, that's an incredible privilege. It's an incredible gift. It's an incredible opportunity. That, for me, is a get-to kind of thing. What about with you? Can you think of the times in your life when you've struggled between have to and get to? And what is it that causes the shift for you that changes your have-tos to get-tos, or your get-tos to have-tos? I tell you, when I was a kid growing up, I hated to clean my room. That was a have-to kind of thing for me. But for my mother, she loved having clean rooms in the house. That was a get-to kind of thing for her, but not for me. And as an adult, I don't like those mundane, inescapable tasks that just come along during the course of every week. They are have-to kinds of things for me. But there are other people that work on our staff for whom checking off those to-do lists and those things that need to be done, those are get-to kinds of things for them. I don't quite understand that, but that's the way they're wired. But for me, that's have-to kinds of things. And I'm sure all of you have your have-to list and your get-to list that you know very well what's on those lists. But here's the question of the day for all of us. What if our have-tos were changed to get-tos? What if the things that are on our have-to list could be changed into get-tos? Take the membership vows that we've been talking about so far this year. When we join the Methodist Church, we pledge to uphold the church with our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our service, and our witness. And during this series of sermons to start the year, we've been talking about being faithful and generous with those vows that we've made. Not only upholding them, but we've been trying to kick it up a notch and inviting you to be faithful, to consider being faithful and generous with those vows that you've made. And so far, we've talked about being faithful and generous with our prayers. We've talked about being faithful and generous with our presence. But what if, for all of us, those vows became get-to kinds of things and not have-to kinds of things? What if we could all say, I get to be faithful and generous with my prayers, and I get to be faithful and generous with our presence? And then what does that look like with the subject of the day today? To say that I get to be faithful and generous with my giving. It's the kind of attitude that we've talked about before when we've talked about the reaction of the Macedonians to that special offering that was being taken up to help the beleaguered church in Jerusalem. Remember in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1, Paul wrote this. He said, we want you to know about the grace of God that's been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and they even gave beyond their means of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. Did you see that get-to attitude there? They begged for the opportunity to participate in the special offering. This was a get-to kind of thing for them. So what I want to know is, what would it take for all of us today to possess that same get-to kind of attitude with respect to our giving? Now, you need to understand that my purpose today is not to spend this sermon talking about having a get-to attitude with respect to giving our money. That's really not the focus of this message today, because, I mean, you know, I don't need to tell you that it takes money to run the church. You know that. And if this church is going to continue to do the great things in the coming year that it's been able to do in the past year and the years before, then it's going to require that all of us be just as faithful and generous with the giving of our money this coming year as we were faithful and generous with the giving our money in the past year. I mean, you've proven well that you understand what it means to be faithful and generous with your money. I mean, this December, after pledging almost $8.5 million toward our capital campaign, and then after giving more than you've ever given during a calendar year toward the annual budget, in fact, by almost $200,000, you gave more than you've ever given before. After all of that, on Christmas Eve, for our special Christmas Eve offering, you gave $49,570 toward our Christmas Eve offering that we give away to help people in need in our community and beyond. So I know you understand what it means to be faithful and generous with your money. And because of that, I know that 2 weeks from now, when we hand out the annual commitment cards for our operating budget, and you get to fill one of those cards out, it's going to be a great day of celebration. So I don't want to spend a lot of time this morning talking about giving money, but what I really want to talk about today, more than anything else, has to do with the mindset, with the attitude of being a get-to giver. A get-to giver of your gifts, of your talents, of your abilities, of your resources. How would you describe yourself in that regard? Are you a get-to or a have-to giver? And if you're a have-to giver, here's the question: how do I move from being a have-to a get-to giver? Now, as I was looking at that text in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, I noticed a 7-word phrase that I believe gets at the heart of what it takes to move from being a have to a get to giver. You remember what it said? This is in 2 Corinthians 8, verse 5. It says this: they gave themselves first to the Lord. They gave themselves first to the Lord. That's where it starts, I believe, if we're going to move from being have to givers to get to givers. We give ourselves first to the Lord. Of course, isn't that where everything ought to begin? With giving ourselves first to the Lord? I mean, here's the thing. When it comes to giving, relationship always trumps responsibility. Relationship always trumps responsibility. It's always easier to give within the context of a relationship than it is to give out of a sense of duty or obligation. It's why I believe the Macedonians begged to be able to give to that special offering for the relief of the saints in Jerusalem. They begged to give because they gave themselves first to the Lord. And out of that relationship with Jesus, the one who gave supremely of himself, they were led to give in response. In Luke chapter 19, that passage of scripture I read just a little while ago, Jesus told the story of a nobleman who was about to go to another country to receive for himself a kingdom. He was going to be named king and then return. Of course, Jesus was talking about himself in this parable. But this is what he said. He said, so he called 10 of his servants and he gave them 10 minas. And he said, put this money to work until I come back. Now you may be wondering, what's a mina? Well, a mina is 100 drachmas. Is that good? Now, so maybe you're wondering what a drachma is. Well, a drachma is a day's wage. So to put it in our terms, let's say that a day's wage is $200. Now, for some people, that may not be very much money at all. For some people, that may be a lot of money. But let's just, for sake of easy math, let's just say that a day's wage is $200. And so if you have 100 of those, you have $20,000. That would be a mina. And so he gives out 10 minas that day. And so he gives out how much? $200,000. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I don't want to get caught up in mina details. I couldn't resist. So he gives each of them $20,000 and he says, put this money to work. In other words, he says, invest it. Do something with it. Put it to good use. Now, I want to ask you something before we go any further. This nobleman gives a mina to each one of these servants. Now, whose money is it when it's given to him? Whose money is it? Is it theirs or is it his? It's his, right? And they're really charged with being managers of his money. And you know, if you really think about it, this applies to everything that God has given us. In fact, everything we have has been given to us by God. Your gifts, your talents, your abilities, your resources, everything that you are, everything that you have that makes you what you are, everything that you possess has been given to you by God. In fact, we are given the holy calling to manage all that God has given us. To use what he's given us, not for our glory, but for his glory. So when you sing for him. When you work for him. When you teach for him. When you're on a sports field, you do it for him. When you're making a decision about a business deal, that decision that you make ultimately benefits him. Do you get the picture here? In his sermon entitled, What is Man? John Wesley, who started the Methodist movement, he said this. He said, you were born for nothing else. You live for nothing else. Your life is continued to you upon this earth for no other purpose than this, that you may know, love and serve God on earth and enjoy him to all eternity. You were not created to please your senses, or to gratify your imagination, or to gain money, or to gain the praise of men, or to seek happiness in any created good and anything under the sun. All of this leads to a restless, miserable life, which ultimately then leads to a miserable eternity. On the contrary, Wesley said, you were created for this and for no other purpose, by seeking and finding happiness in God on earth and to secure the glory of God in heaven. So why are we here? Why did God make us? I mean, what's the foundational, overarching purpose of our lives? It is to glorify God and enjoy him today, tomorrow, and for eternity. It's what Paul was talking about when he wrote to the church in Corinth. He said, so whether you eat or whether you drink or whatever you do everything for the glory of God. And the beauty of all of this is that God has given each of us gifts so that we can put those to use in such a way that we give him glory. Peter said it like this in 1 Peter 4:10. He said, God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. So use them well to serve one another. Do you have the gift of speaking? Then speak as though God himself were speaking through you. Do you have the gift of helping others? Then do it with all the strength and energy that God supplies. Then everything you do will bring glory to God through Jesus Christ. It's a powerful word. I want you to think for a moment about the gifts that God has given you. Notice in Peter's words there that God has given each person a gift. Gifts are not just given to a few. Gifts are given to every single human being. Every one of us in this room has been given at least one gift, and we are called to use those gifts to serve and to strengthen one another and to glorify God. I heard one person say that it is the supreme joy of life to discover what your gifts are and then pour yourself out to others through those gifts. And that is so true. It's why I believe it's so important that we consider being faithful and generous with our gifts and recognize that God's given us gifts not for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others. I think about people in our church who've used the gifts that God has given them. I think about Sally McKee, who joined our church a number of years ago, but before she joined our church, she came into my office and she said, now, Jerry, she said, and she was almost 80 years old at the time, and she said, I'm about to move to College Station. I want to make sure that if I come to your church, I can lead an ESL ministry. And English is a second language ministry. And I learned pretty quickly, you don't say no to Sally McKee. And I said, well, okay, we can do it. And she came, she joined our church, and we have a thriving English as a second language ministry because of the way that she's allowed God to use her gift of evangelism in such a way that she is helping through her love for the ESL ministry to reach people of other languages and draw them to Jesus. I think about Missy Holloway and the overwhelming gift of hospitality that she has. You walk in the doors on a Sunday morning and you can't miss her, because she won't let you miss her. It's just part of who she is. I think about Jerry Vinson, and somebody moved my pulpit, but he makes a bunch of crosses. I don't know where they are. Oh, there's one. This is a cross that Jerry Vinson's made. I don't know how many hundreds of crosses he's made during the course of his cross-making ministry, but he makes these in his shop and gives them to people as a way of showing and sharing his love for Jesus. Today, we have a group of students from Mary Hardin Baylor who are here. They are part of a ministry, really, at Mary Hardin Baylor called the First Year Collective. My daughter's with them. They're all sitting on this row back here. And they're a part of a ministry that helps freshmen who come into Mary Hardin Baylor grow in their leadership and work through community service and grow in their spiritual lives. And these students here today are part of the leadership of that. And they pour themselves into those students because they've been poured into on their first year, and they want to share that with others. They want to share that gift that God has given them, and it's a get-to kind of thing for them. It's a get-to kind of thing to be hospitable for Missy Holloway. It's a get-to kind of thing for Jerry Vincent to make these crosses and give them away to people. It was a get-to kind of thing for Sally McKee to launch an ESL ministry here at this church. I think about people in the Bible like Barnabas. Barnabas was also known as the son of encouragement. I look around and I see people in this room who have been Barnabas for me. I'll bet you can think of people who've been Barnabas for you. That person who is an encourager, they have that gift and they share it. It's a get-to kind of thing for them. It's just natural. And it brings them joy. I think about Andrew, one of Jesus' disciples. You may recall that Andrew went to his brother Peter and he said, hey, I want to tell you about somebody that I've met. Come and see. And so he brought his brother Simon Peter to come and meet Jesus. And do you remember the day Jesus was standing before a crowd of 5,000 people who were hungry? Who was it that brought up that boy that had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish? It was Andrew. Maybe there's an Andrew in your life that brought you to faith in Jesus, that introduced you to him. Maybe you've been an Andrew to someone else. What I've noticed about all these people is that they are get-to givers and not have-to givers. They're get-to givers because they are living and giving in response to the relationship that they have with Jesus and not out of some sense of duty or responsibility. And that's where their joy comes from. It's what sustains them in their living out those gifts. Look at what happened in the story from Luke 19. The nobleman came back and he called his servants into his office. And the first one came in and said, sir, your mina has earned 10 more. And so he looked at that servant and he said, well done, my good and faithful servant. Because you've been trustworthy in a very small matter, now take charge of 10 cities. Second one came in and he said, sir, your mina has earned 5 more. And so he looks at him and he says, take charge of 5 cities. But then the other servant came in and he said, sir, here's your mina. I kept it laid away in a piece of cloth because I was afraid of you. Because you're a hard man. You take out what you didn't put in and you reap what you didn't sow. Those first 2 servants, they were get-to kinds of givers. They were given their minas, and they saw the opportunity that they had been given that was ahead of them, and they put that to use. They saw that what they had been entrusted with had value and had worth, and so they wanted to honor their master by putting what he had given them to work, just as he'd asked. But that third servant, he didn't know the heart of his master. He didn't trust that what he had been given had any value at all. So he didn't do anything with what had been given to him. So what's it going to be for you? You know, God has given you gifts. He's given you talents. He's given you abilities. He's given you resources. And what he has given you has great value and great potential. So what are you going to do with them? What do you say? Let's spend the days ahead for us being get-to givers, embracing that joy-filled journey that he has placed before us. Will it always be easy? No. He didn't promise that the journey would be easy. But what he did promise us is that he will always be there with us, encouraging us, empowering us, and giving us everything we need to do exactly what he's called us and gifted us to do. And that we can count on. So what do you say? Let's be get-to givers in 2020 and see what God will do in response. Let's pray.